Obscene ad meant for children hidden from parents on a child's tablet. Smart tech helps progressives market sex to kids right under their parents' noses. I'm Dr. Duke, she's Katie, and this is The Dr. Duke Show. Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Dr. Duke Show, the only program that keeps you educated on the craziness impacting K-12 classrooms and college campuses around the world. Today, we start with a very disturbing warning from parents after a young girl was targeted with a video about adultery, homosexuality, and lying to your spouse, all while playing a children's game on her tablet. And it's not just that. This is the most shocking aspect of this. She was watching an advertisement during a game she was playing that was really inappropriate. It had two men kissing, homosexuality, and that it was advocating for adultery, and these two men who were having a sexual relationship were actually lying to their current wives. But the funny thing is that when the mom took the tablet and she was playing a video game. And as one of, when you play those video games, there's ads that pop up, and you got to watch the ads before, unless you're paying for the video game, you got to watch the ad, then you can play again. Well, she got it on the tablet herself, and she played the game, right? Trying to replicate the ad pop up, and it never happened. Her husband came home from work, and she explained everything to him. He was concerned too. He sat down and couldn't do it. And then all of a sudden, they had a hunch. Could it possibly be so insidious that the computer was doing facial recognition? That it knew that the father and the mother weren't the little girl. And when the father and mother were looking at the screen, nothing was going to happen. So they did a test. They gave the little girl the tablet, and they looked over her shoulder, I believe it was, or they were watching from behind her. And all of a sudden, when the little girl's face was playing the game, boom, this highly sexualized ad has popped up. It's pretty shocking.
The family we're talking about, it's Deborah and Jason Letson. They're from Arkansas. So they took to Facebook, they made a video so they could point out to other parents that if your kids are playing this game, the game is actually called Hop Ball 3D. It's an iPad game. We know that iPads are being used all over the nation by our kids, occupy some time. And, a lot of times parents give them the iPad, say, go play a game. Hop Ball 3D, it looks like it's just an innocent game, which the game itself is, but it's the ad that came on. Take a look at what they said.
While playing this game, an ad popped up for her, a video ad. It was very inappropriate. Basically, what it exposed our children to was, first off, a homosexual relationship, which is something that we, have already talked and discussed with our daughters. But even way further than that, it advertised lying in a marriage. It advertised adultery in a marriage. It just became so much more when we realized how many inappropriate things were targeted, and that our 7-year-old understood.
In that minute and a half, she knew there were two men kissing, and
he was hiding
they were hiding it from their wife that they had. There's no reason why a child should even see this ad except to instill this ideology in them early in life.
And what's really frightening about this is that this was not even a computer, a tablet that was given to them by the schools. If this is what they're seeing on a random tablet that a family bought, this kind of technological gerrymandering with what's going on that parents have no idea about. It makes you wonder, with the radical sexual curriculum in the public schools right now, and we've done shows where there have been really pornography on some of those sites that kids, when they bring their computers home, that requires their password. And if that password is entered, they can get at information that's actually pornographic, we have found, right? So if they're doing this randomly on computers, then one wonders how much more alarming this is and what your kids can see on their school computers versus what you ever get to see.
Well, and kudos to Deborah and Jason. Deborah's actually a teacher, so she's well aware of what kids kind of are exposed to, and she's very vigilant about making sure that her own daughters, and I'm hoping then her school children, aren't exposed to things they shouldn't be. But Deborah and Jason both looked at this very level-headed. I recommend everyone go and watch the full video of it, because they explained that they're not just some parents who are like, we can't have our kids see anything. They want their kids protected. They've talked to their kids about what their family values are, what their morality level is. And so for them to try and figure out exactly what happened with this Hop Ball 3D and how the ad actually only affected, the ad knew what it was doing. So it's not some weird conspiracy theory that we're coming up with, but they tested it to see when this ad would come up. And because this ad at her 7-year-olds are attentive. She didn't skip the ad. She couldn't skip the ad. She had to watch through the ad because it's during a game she wants to play. So she'll be patient. She'll wait the minute and a half or whatever. I think he said it was a minute and a half of the entire ad just to get back to the game. So these people, whoever is putting this ad out there into this game, know how to get the kids hooked.
And what you said is really important. They know that young children want to play that game. It becomes almost addicting, right? It becomes something that becomes very repetitive. And so for that minute and a half or whatever it is while they're waiting for the game to come back, they're glued to what's happening. They can't fast forward it. They can't delete it. They're watching this. And the fact that when the parents tried to replicate this, nothing. And then when the minute the child got back on, boom, it played, tells you what's really going on here. You've got these companies, these tech companies, all the other ways they're messing with democracy, they're messing with elections, they're messing with censorship in terms of people who aren't progressive enough, whose messages aren't. They're deplatforming people left and right. Big time people like Stefan Molyneux on YouTube, who had hundreds of millions of views for his shows and 1 million followers, deplatformed, boom, just like that, erased from the internet. But meanwhile, they're handing your kids this stuff.
We've been talking about it for years now, about the sexualization of our children in our schools. And California always seems to lead the way into pushing the boundaries further and further out. And so now the California Assembly voted overwhelmingly to set up a fund that uses taxpayer dollars to give minors and adults cross-sex hormones and surgeries that will permanently destroy their reproductive systems. Didn't even blink an eye. This is how California operates. So take a look at the bill. It's called AB 2218, the Transgenders Wellness and Equity Fund. And it was passed 59-13. So there's 13 legislators in the state of California who maybe care about your kids.
Which also means that a few Democrats had to cross the line.
Somebody had to.
Because they have a bulletproof majority in every aspect of government in California. And look, pay attention to this, parents, because whatever problems you may have voting for Donald Trump, a vote for Joe Biden is a vote for this. Joe Biden is going to be managed and handled by his cabinet and his vice president. And if you think Joe Biden is insufficiently middle of the road for you, I mean, here's a guy who's pretty out there, things that he supported in the past. Imagine what's going to happen when you have people like AOC in charge of the environment, right? Where you've got Beto O'Rourke in charge of the Second Amendment. They've already announced those people are going to be part of the cabinet. You see what happens when when progressives have no opposition, they have super majorities. What happens is things go way faster than whatever their campaign promises are.
So when you take a look at this bill, they actually lay out, statistics because they want to sound like they're actually speaking for the majority and all the people, and we're backed by science, but not really. So according to them, within the bill statistics, they say that there are at least 218,400 people in California who identify as transgender, and that 27%, this statistic blows my mind, 27%, or 796,000 youth who are ages 12 to 17 are viewed as gender non-conforming by their peers. So 1 in 4, they're saying, according to this bill, that 1 in 4 youth ages 12 to 17 are viewed as gender non-conforming.
Yeah, this is
by their
unbelievable.
peers.
So California says 218,000 people identify as transgender, but almost 800,000 12 to 17-year-olds are gender non-conforming.
Yes.
This is absolute and utter nonsense.
Also, 1 in 5 transgender adults has attempted suicide, which is 6 times that of a cisgender, also known as a male or a female, of the population. The transgender adults are more likely to report having a disability due to physical, mental, or emotional condition at a rate of 60% to the 27% of those who are their own sex.
This always gets me so angry. So on the one hand, we need to be able to give them whatever they want. We need to start performing surgeries on toddlers because of suicide rates. But we can't talk about, and we point out here that the mental health capacities of so-called transgender people
mental or emotional.
Mental and emotional are greatly diminished, and yet we're not allowed to say the one thing has anything to do with the other. Could it be that people who believe they're transgender, they're gender confused, could that be a mental illness? No, it couldn't be. We just ignore the facts, right? We ignore the facts that people who identify that way have significantly more mental problems. But there's no relationship, right? Mm-hmm. And so literally going in and performing an operation to remove their genitals or pumping little kids full of hormones. So let's assume for a second what they just admitted is true. They admit there are exponentially large numbers of mental illness among these people, right? Emotional and mental, they just admitted it. And so performing surgeries, irreversible surgeries, and pumping people and their children full of dangerously high levels of hormones, that's going to make their mental state better? Supposedly. It's not. It's not going to make and that's why how many people who who become comfortable with their transgenderism still go on to commit suicide at much higher levels.
Mm-hmm. And what they're saying in this bill is that they're going to fix all this because...
Fix being the operative word.
With the appropriation by the legislature, so with the tax dollars that you're putting in, they're going to give grants that go to trans-led organizations for programs of dancing, painting, writing, and then also afterwards they mentioned the trans-specific housing and education and trainings.
So because you're transgender now, you need special programs in painting,
dancing,
and writing,
and
dancing.
And housing.
Dancing, I mean, really, how is dancing different because of your junk?
Or lack of. Well, here's the rest of the bill. Here's the, meat and potatoes, if you will.
Oh.
The grants shall be available to a hospital, healthcare clinic, or other medical provider that currently provides gender-affirming healthcare
so in other
services.
Words, to get money, you have to be you have to get all this money we're going to dangle in front of you. You have to buy our pseudoscience,
yes.
twig and berries,
such as hormone therapy or gender reassignment surgery, to continue providing those services, or to a hospital, healthcare clinic, or other medical provider that will establish a program that offers gender-affirming healthcare services and has an established relationship with a trans-led organization that will lead in establishing the program. So your trans-led dance program can now help the hospital to give the surgery.
So now you're giving all kinds of money and potential money to people who are 100% convinced that transgenderism is real, and they're not just doctors. I didn't hear mental health people. I heard activists, right?
Yeah,
you're giving millions, if not billions, to activists to make sure we get more and more confused kids. That about to sound right?
And the next part for these tallywhacker taker offers, the hospital, healthcare clinic, or other medical provider that applies for a grant must apply in partnership with a trans-led organization and consult with the trans-led organization
so in other words,
the process.
Activists and lobbyists are going to get really rich dragging more kids into this debauched lifestyle destroying their mental and emotional health.
For this trans-inclusive healthcare program.
Yep.
So we know California's crazy, and they're the land of the Planned Parenthoods, and Planned Parenthood is doing its own thing, which is to say it's doing pretty much the same as what these trans-inclusive groups and organizations want to do. The Planned Parenthood is now taking their turn to train up the next generation of peer educators, and they're trying to take it to the schools. And when I say try to take it, I mean they are taking it to the schools. The Capital Resource Institute actually reported on this topic, and they laid out basically exactly what Planned Parenthood has been doing to get sexual instruction, air quotes, instruction, into our schools, and how they are the nation's largest seller of comprehensive sex ed in the curriculum that is put in our schools. So the newsletter that Capital Resource Institute put out says kids having sex at earlier ages, kids understanding abortion as a right, and kids knowing how to access abortion is a formula for profit for Planned Parenthood. It's no surprise then that Planned Parenthood is in the sex ed business. In fact, Planned Parenthood is the nation's largest seller of comprehensive sex ed curriculum to the school districts. And so basically Planned Parenthood gets these curriculum into our schools by various different ways. They lobby state legislators, or state legislators, and then it makes their way into these state legislatures where the California Assembly passes such bills that will eventually become law. And then they make all the donations to these various legislators, and they know that if they can get that curriculum into, like the California Healthy Youth Act, we've talked about this, they know that the less the parents are knowing about what Planned Parenthood is actually wanting to teach the kids, just putting it in a bill and kind of like sneaking it in there, the better and the more power they will have, and that's what's happening.
Yeah, and the last story is totally illustrated by this one. In the last story, we're seeing how California is going to give a lot of money to activist groups. That activist money is dependent upon bringing more and more kids down the transgender road. It's a vicious cycle. You want to see what that's going to look like? Just look at Planned Parenthood now. They are lobbying our public schools. They have written textbooks. They're not writers. They are not historians. They are not even officially sexologists. They're just Planned Parenthood employees, right? They're creating curriculum for the public schools, and they figured out that by doing this, because you've got all this sex requirement, all this comprehensive sex ed in the schools now, so they're getting paid to do this. They're making money off your kids to sexualize them. Those sexualized kids get more sexual diseases and require more abortions, and they get paid for that. And meanwhile, the federal government is funding them, their lobbyists, to the tune of about $600 million a year. You are 2 years away from that same model of Planned Parenthood being invoked in almost every state in the union federally on the basis of these ideas, this idea of lobbying activists.
And the smartest thing that Planned Parenthood is doing now is getting these peer educators.
Kids.
Because it for teenagers, it's all about fitting in and wanting to be cool and understanding what everyone else is doing. So they get peer educators, they train them up, and they get them, I've read that they have 40 hours of professional training. They go into a high school. Here's an example. They recruit these youth to advocate basically on behalf of the Planned Parenthood. In Eureka, California, at Eureka, California High School, they have a thing called Spare Change, Peer Education, and Teen Theater Troupe. So it's a teen theater group. Okay. Planned Parenthood had auditions for these kids to join this little theater troupe, okay? And then they explained how these kids are getting professional training, 40 hours, and then these kids then go out and they educate, they write, and they perform skits about healthy sexuality. And I took a look at one of these samples. It's called The Adventures of Condom Man, Lube Lady, and ... Abstinence Annie. I'm just going to read you a quick little scene. You have these, again, high schoolers are going to perform this in front of their peers to teach them about healthy, quote, sexuality. Condom Man says, you need to use a condom. And then the teenager boy is saying, what, really? And then Condom Man says, yeah, just throw it on there and you're ready to go. And then Lube Lady comes in and she chimes in with lubricant ideas and she actually called the little condom a little sombrero. Okay, so that's what they're doing. But then here comes Abstinence Annie. Oh, no one likes Abstinence Annie.
Wet Blanket Annie, huh?
Wet Blanket Annie. She says, not so fast, Condom Man. You think you're hot stuff? I'm here to show you up. And then the teenagers are like, who is this? And, of course, basically says, Lube Lady, Condom Man, how could you let this happen? Abstinence Annie is always finding us. Of course, because it's Wet Blanket Annie. Is that what you're calling her? Mm-hmm. And, you know, Abstinence Annie says how if you don't have sex, you're 100% safe, da-da-da-da. And they said, but, you know, some people want to have sex, blah, 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 blah. Goes on and says, you're no fun, Abstinence Annie.
So you see where we are, right? Where we went from a system 30 years ago that was abstinence-only education for biology, give them all the biology they need, but abstinence only in terms of their choices and their preferences, to one now where abstinence is now the bad guy in a medieval morality play.
Yes, she is.
This reminds me of this is like Everyman for twisted progressive liberals, right? And so instead of a morality play where you have these abstract characters like God and sin and the devil, now you've got a morality play where Abstinence Annie, the idea that you wouldn't have sex, is the villain. And by the way, calling a piece of rubber you put over the head of your penis a sombrero isn't. Where's the Hispanic lobby on that?
Well, it's in California, so maybe whoever came up with it.
You okay with this?
This was written by the students because they got the 40 hours of professional training to be able to write this. If you read the entire script, you're just
scary stuff.
It is scary stuff.
But there was a worry that 50-year-old adults talking this way to kids might be perceived as bullying or even pornography, child pornography. Now have 15-year-olds do it to other 15-year-olds, and that kind of bullying will not be challenged.
It's time now for some real education. Psalm 51 in the Old Testament is recognized in English by its first verse in the King James translation. Have mercy upon me, O God. In the Greek Septuagint and Latin Vulgate translations, this psalm is Psalm 50 in a slightly different numbering system. A penitential psalm, 51 is attributed to King David and offered as a confession to God after he sinned with Bathsheba. The psalm is a regular part of Jewish, Catholic, Eastern Orthodox, and Protestant liturgies.
And for very good reason. Mike, throw the slide up here and I'll give you a little bit of background. But you may recall that David, in the Old Testament, King David, he went from a nothing shepherd boy until he received the supreme blessing of God. He became the king of all of Israel. He stopped following the Israeli ways. So instead of following his armies into battle like the previous kings did, David sat around the house and he slept in late, and we hear the stories about him getting up late and eating and just ignoring what was going on in the field. He had become exactly what God warned them. When the Israelites asked for a king, God warned them that you'll get one, but that king is going to be like all the other kings, which means he's not going to care for you. He's going to be selfish. He's going to be promoting his own values. That's what happened to David. And so one day, David gets up late, so late in the day that it's almost dusk, goes to the roof of his palace, happens to see on a rooftop across the city beautiful Bathsheba, whose husband is at war, bathing and cleansing herself. His luxurious lifestyle gives way to lust. He commands Bathsheba to his room. They have sex, and she gets pregnant. Meanwhile, David, to try to cover up his sin, has Uriah, the husband of David, murdered on the battlefield. Murder, lust, and adultery from this great king of England. And yet, Psalm 51. One might begin to get a glimpse of why David was forgiven when you look at the psalm he wrote. When the child died, brokenhearted David turned to the Lord for forgiveness and wrote this: Have mercy upon me, O God, according to thy loving kindness, not for my sin, but for your generosity, your mercy, O Lord. According unto the multitude of thy tender mercies, blot out my transgressions, wash me thoroughly from my iniquity, and cleanse me from my sin. Iniquity and sin. Sin is what I did. I stole another man's wife and had him killed. Iniquity is the sin all human beings are born with. It is the stain, the blot of universal sin on our souls. David continues, I acknowledge my transgression, and my sin is ever before me. Against thee and thee only have I sinned, and done this evil in thy sight, that thou mightst be justified when thou speakest, and be clear when thou judgest. Behold, I was shapen in iniquity, as we all are, and in sin did my mother conceive me. Behold, I know, Lord, that you desire truth in the inward parts, and in the hidden part you shall make me to know wisdom. What David is begging for is a cleansing that is inside and outside, not a superficial forgiveness, but a complete erasure through God's mercy, not anything that he can do. Go to the final slide on this at the end of the poem, and you'll see he begs the Lord to deliver him from blood guilt. O God, the God of my salvation, and my tongue shall sing aloud of thy righteousness. And he's doing it, right? He is singing aloud in these beautiful musical poems about the mercy of God. O Lord, open thou my lips, and my mouth shall show forth thy praise. For thou desirest not sacrifice. Used to be a time where I could kill a couple of bulls on the altar and be forgiven. Not this time. For you desire not sacrifice, else I would give it. Thou delightest not in burnt offerings. The sacrifices that God forgives and honors are a broken spirit and a broken and contrite heart, O God, you will not despise. And so even though the period before Christ would go on another 500 years or more, actually considerably longer, before you got rid of animal sacrifice for sin. I do something wrong, a couple of bulls and a couple of sheep are going to pay the price, and then the Lord will forgive me. You have a situation here where hundreds and hundreds of years before his time, David recognizes that a blood sacrifice of an animal can't atone for my sin. It is a precursor in many ways of the kind of sacrifice that Christ demanded of his followers.
All right, as always, you can follow us on Facebook and Parler. And if you have a question for our Friday Q&A, visit freedomproject.com/askduke or send us a message on the social media. Now, as a reminder, Freedom Project Academy's live online school is enrolling new students for just 2 more weeks, so the time is running out. Request your free packet at freedomforschool.com. That's freedomforschool.com. Now, as always, we're going to wrap things up with our fun fact of the day. In addition to David, there are at least 6 other authors who contributed to the book of Psalms: Moses, Solomon, Asaph, the sons of Korah, and Ethan the Ezrahite.
And also interesting fun fact, to counter your fun fact, is that the word Selah, S-E-L-A-H, appears through most of the Psalms. And we don't know what it means. We think it's a musical notation. Remember, these poems were meant to be sung. We don't know what what music accompanied them. We don't know what instruments were played. We don't even know the musical notation. And we don't even know what the word Selah, which punctuates many of these poems, what it means. We assume it is some kind of musical direction. And that'll do it for our show. For Freedom Project, I'm Dr. Duke. She's Katie. Until next time, stay educated, my friends.